Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And this is Lorenzo.
And welcome to Hacking Your Leadership, a Spreaker Prime podcast.
Thanks to all our Patreon members and our loyal listeners for tuning in today. Before we begin, here's a short message from a sponsor.
No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about something a little bit different than we normally do. I want to talk about mental health at work.
Yeah, it's a very important topic right now.
It is. I just finished an interview, which we'll publish in about a week or two, with the chief data scientist from Gallup named Jim Harter, and we had a great discussion that touched on this a lot because he's very passionate about it as well. We had a great Clubhouse discussion about this last week around the fact that workplace suicides are up. There was an article that talked about how the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a rise in workplace-related suicides every single year, basically through 2019, and which was the highest. And they haven't even brought up 2020 yet, which you have to assume is going to be even higher due to pandemic-related issues. And so it's an issue that is not going away. It's not relegated simply to the pandemic because, again, this is something that's been going on for a while and getting worse over time. Do you feel that as a leader you have become that part of your job, or at least more of your job now than maybe 10 years ago, is rooted in, for lack of a better word, mental health counseling or kind of like backdoor therapy for some of your employees?
Absolutely. I think I think one of the things that when we talk a lot about people bringing their unique selves to work and showing up, to be the best kind of version of themselves and that type of thing, when you really open that door to wanting to empower people to be themselves and to be unique and to kind of bring all of themselves to work, what that I think also does is it gives, some element of permission to talk about things that you normally wouldn't talk about at work. And many of those things can be struggles they're having, in day-to-day life. It could be struggles they're having with family or friends, financially. There becomes a lot more conversation happening around work and with teams on subjects that typically people would say, like, that's not a work-related thing, or I'm going to leave that at home and I'm going to show up and just do my job while I'm here. And I think as we've seen that movement in really respecting the uniqueness of people and empowering people's voices to be heard, it's not just work-related things that we're talking about now. It's a lot more personal things. And then I think you take that with everything that happened with 2020. There was a lot of topics that typically, and I know we've talked about this on the podcast, these topics that you normally would never talk about at work have now been moved right to the front of the line of, like, you better be talking about this at work because it's impacting your people and it's impacting how they show up. And as a leader, there's many times where taking all of my experience, all of my tenure, all of the conversations I've had with people over the years, that you can still feel very ill prepared because it's not necessarily something that leaders are educated in or have really had a chance to flex any of that muscle over the years. And so it can be really kind of difficult and burdening and stressful and create anxiety just as the leader trying to navigate some of these conversations with people.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there when it comes to the lack of preparedness from many leaders. This is a leadership podcast, and so we're not here to solve the mental health problems on this show, but we're here to kind of address the fact that this is a very real thing from a leadership standpoint, and a lot of leaders are feeling exactly what you just said, which is, I feel like a large part, or at least a part of my job that was not there a few years ago and feels like is there now, is that I need to be this somehow this almost life coach or kind of shoulder to cry on or ear for my employees when it comes to things that have nothing to do with work. And while maybe 10 years ago I felt like that was fine if a person wanted to confide in me about something they were going through, and I could sit there and go, oh man, that sucks. I'm so sorry about that. If anything I do to help, let me know. And it was like as simple as that. And it's not as simple as that anymore. Anybody can do that. And as long as you have compassion for people, then the basic modicum of that is being able to empathize with something they're going through and kind of meet them where they are and utilize the resources that your organization has in order to help them. That's not what we're talking about here. That's the basic stuff. What I'm talking about is being able to kind of recognize when your employees are going through something that they may not be saying. And maybe they're not saying it because you haven't, as the leader, set up an environment to where your people feel comfortable talking about it. But if they're not talking about it to you, they're talking about it to somebody. Or they're not talking about it to anybody, they're keeping it to themselves. And that can lead to, on a best case scenario, just a huge drop in engagement and productivity and results. Because if something like that is happening where it's preoccupying an employee's mind, they are not putting their mind and their efforts into whatever they're supposed to be doing at work. And that might sound like the problem is the numbers. That it's not the case at all. The problem is that if people aren't seeing work as a happy place, if people aren't seeing work as a refuge from whatever is happening in their personal life, but rather it is an increase in their stress of whatever's happening at work, then you're basically adding to the problem as opposed to even being neutral to it.
I agree. And I think that, historically, like if you were high in maybe EQ or empathy, if you were the type of leader that felt really connected to your people, if you're the type of leader that were having more often those conversations about personal life and providing advice and kind of being like a life coach,
sure.
I think what happened, over the last 12 to 14 months is that like the fire hose was opened up on those leaders, because now people already saw you in that space. They already knew that you were somebody they could talk to. The trust was there. The relationship was there. And now with all these things going on, it just became really a heavy, heavy burden on many of those leaders. And I can tell you through experience that can be very fatiguing as a leader, right? Like you, it's one of those, it's one of those things you have to be conscious of. Like, are being fatigued by the dialogue or the conversation or the support is minimal in compared to the fatigue that somebody has when they live this as their life. So like I don't want to undervalue the fact that people and employees going through things like that's the real fatigue. If the what's going on around you, if the environment that you're in, if the relationships that you have, all these things, these burdens that you might have in your life, that is really fatiguing because you're not just talking about it, you're living it. But I think for a lot of leaders, where maybe that was a small percentage of some of the dialogue throughout the day or throughout the week, or every once in a while, you'd find yourself working with an individual around something that they're working on or going through in their like home life. When that becomes daily, when that becomes hourly, when that becomes almost just most of what you do in the day, that can be really difficult to take on. Because I think that again, if you're not trained in these elements of psychology and and just like counseling and things like that, it's hard to just internalize yourself and to find kind of just a space where you could get a chance to almost relax and be able to not carry all of that burden of your people. And I think that that's one thing that for a lot of leaders that I've spoken with, that we've talked about and talked to via Clubhouse and through the podcast, and a lot of the communication from our listeners and some of the leaders has changed. There's been a lot more questions about, how are you handling these types of conversations, and how are you spending your time differently, and how is that impacting you as the leader? So it is something that I think we're all, again, learning together. We're all kind of trying to figure this out. And it's definitely something that, as we referenced the article, I think to your point, like the best case scenario is that there's a lack of engagement. The worst case scenario we know, of course, is like the worst of all things, which is people just, making the decision that it's just too much. But I think that there's a lot of that happening kind of across, the workforces right now and a lot of industries right now. And I think it's something that we're going to have to continue to think about and not necessarily solve for, but at least have a lot of dialogue on how do we create a culture and an environment where not only is the stigma taken away about talking about mental health, but that we are actually getting better at providing resources for our people when they need it.
Yeah, I want to be really clear on something. If you're feeling this as a leader, it's not wrong to kind of bemoan this a little bit. Like I get what you were saying, Lorenzo, on making sure that we understand that a person going through something terrible or having a mental health crisis or people who worry about a lot of things going on in their life right now that maybe they didn't worry about 5 or 6 years ago, that they're kind of living through this, and we don't want to lessen what we know the impact of that is. But if you're a leader and you're feeling this, obviously you're not feeling it like the person who's going through it is. But if you're helping half a dozen people go through different things, that absolutely does add up. And there's nothing wrong with having that get to you. There's nothing wrong with it weighing heavily on you, because it's really hard to compartmentalize all of that away if you are the kind of person who has empathy. If you didn't have empathy to begin with for your people, if you didn't actually care about them, if you just kind of were kind of faking empathy, then this wouldn't be as difficult for you, but it would be seen through very quickly by your employees. If your employees are coming to you, if they are confiding in you, and if you're having these conversations with them multiple times over time, it probably means that you do actually have empathy for them, because they see that from you and they're looking at you as a go-to person. Be very thankful about that. That means you're a step ahead of a lot of people who are not even having these conversations because their people don't view them that way. That's a very good thing. But as Lorenzo was saying, if you're not kind of classically trained in what to do with these conversations, it can seem like you're fumbling through them. And fumbling through these conversations quarterly is not a big deal. Anybody can get through them, Fumbling through them daily with multiple people who you feel like every conversation isn't making movement towards something, but it's rather just treading water or helping them stay where they are or hoping things get better, but there's nothing really you can do about it. That can absolutely, over time, make it difficult for you as a leader to even get your job done. I know leaders who over the last few years have just started saying, I used to love work and I just don't anymore. I just don't, because I get there and I feel like the problems that I'm solving, it used to be, 4 out of 5 of them were work problems and 1 out of 5 was somebody's, personal problem. And now it's 5 out of 5 are personal problems. And while I like that I'm seen as someone who can help with that, I like that my people confide in me, it definitely weighs by the end of the day. It's something that eats away at me when I'm not at work, because I think about, I hope this person is getting through this okay, and I wonder how it's impacting them. That does weigh over time. And so there are things that I think we all need to be able to do to compartmentalize that away, not to stop caring, but to make sure that we, the airplane the airplane thing in the back of the seat back where you got to put your own oxygen mask on before you put other people's on, because if you're passed out, you can't help anybody. That's a very real thing here. You have to, as a leader, be able to find a way to make sure that your oxygen mask is on tight and that you have your good supply of oxygen, or all of this work that you're doing for other people is not going to be worth anything if you no longer have the ability to do it.
Yeah, I think another thing too, when I read the article and I saw kind of retail employees, in the top 5 there, of really feeling this amount of stress and anxiety and all of that. I was thinking about the fact that it's interesting. Like at first, I was like, "Well, that's interesting that I would see that," but then I started to think about actually how the job and the environment has changed as a result of 2020, and thinking about just beyond the responsibility of providing the service to the public and, working in retail for those that have done it, or, you may have, obviously people shop in retail stores. Like, employees are measured by their productivity and their efficiency and their capability of not just offering great customer service, but then offering other things to go around with whatever brought you into that store today. And I think, you take that alone and then you layer on top of that the what happens when stores close, what happens when companies are furloughing employees, what happens when you see less employees in other stores, and is that you, and should you be concerned about having a job in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then all of the requirements around things like wearing masks in stores and stuff like that. Now we're not only are you helping serve the public, but in some instances your organization is asking you to be confrontational in whatever it is the requirements that you have in your business. And so that in itself is not a space that a lot of leaders in retail or employees in retail are used to doing. Usually the element of the confrontation is as a result of maybe somebody really being upset about something that was charged incorrectly, or they were not happy with whatever thing is that they bought and they want to complain about that, or maybe the way that maybe somebody treated them or said something to them, where as a leader you're dealing with some of these things. But now, in over the last year or so, before you even walk in the door, there are signs up that say these are the new rules and you must follow them. And we're not negotiating this, and that's not usually a space that a lot of retail employees are used to being in. Most of the time, it's like you're focused on training people to be welcoming and wanting to have a positive approach to a customer, and say all these things that you would normally do to create an environment that somebody wants to come in and shop and enjoy and make purchases. Right off the bat, it's like these are the rules, and if you're slightly breaking it, I have to enforce that, and it's a very different thing. So I just think that layer of behavioral change and expectation, coupled with leaders and people showing up as their unique selves, I think I can see where that would rise retail workers higher on the list of something like this article.
Yeah, and two more elements too that you didn't mention. Those are all great, but there is real pandemic fatigue amongst the customer base. And so customers who are walking up, they're not walking up and going, what is this? What is this new thing? New rules? What? No, they've seen it 100 times in the last 100 places they tried to go. And some of them understand, and some of them know that this is what they have to do because they live in a society. And some of them are really pushing back on it. Some of them don't like this, and they're pushing back on it. And you never know if the person that you're gonna go talk to is one or the other. If they're a wow, I really love what you're doing here, and I love that you're helping keep the community safe, or if they're I can't believe you're following. I can't believe you too. Really, you too believe this? You never know. You never know what kind of customer you're gonna approach or that is gonna talk to you, and just the not knowing that, it will add stress to you in terms of if you're gonna talk to 50 people a day, how many of them are going to be in one group versus another? Because it's never all the first group. And then on top of that, you also have the fact that, retail in general was considered essential. I'm using air quotes here, essential. And so, I don't know a lot of retail people who saw, large pay increases over the last 2 years, it's kind of status quo when it comes to that. And yet, but you're considered essential, which means you come to work. And so you have basically two kind of scenarios if you were in retail. Either you don't have a job anymore because you were furloughed and maybe you go on unemployment, or hopefully, if that's an option to you, or you are expected to go to work and be amongst the public who may or may not treat you correctly. And so it has removed a lack of perceived control and options in the minds of a lot of people who used to believe that they were doing what they were doing out of choice. A lot of that choice has been taken away. And so that in and of itself can raise a lot of the stress, because when people feel or perceive a lack of choice or lack of options, that stress that comes from that can be worse even if the situation didn't change. Even if you would come to work because you wanted to come to work, or even, nothing has to actually change, except that in your mind you understand that I went from being here because I wanted to be here to being here because I have no other choice. That's just a stress that can weigh on people too.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a word from a sponsor.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. This is kind of a two-pronged approach here. First, in the business of retail, we talk about offer rates, right? We talk about talking to as many customers, as many clients as you can about the same things over and over again, because it's about, if you only offer it half the time, you'll get it 10% of that half the time. That's even less. But if you offer it 100% of the time, whatever that is, it will increase your kind of close rate. This is the exact same thing when it comes to the resources your organization gives when it comes to helping employees through problems they're experiencing in their personal life and with mental health. And so be very, very good about knowing and articulating what those resources are that your organization offers or has access to. Be very good about talking about what the ins and outs of them are, and then repeat them over and over again to your people. Make them understand that this isn't an afterthought, but rather it's something that is there for a reason, and it's there so that your employees can take advantage of these things. And the more you say it, the more you will start to convince some people that those resources might be right for them, and you might help people get to a place where they get some real problem solving occurring that you might not have the resources personally to be able to solve yourself. On the same token, look at those resources for yourself. We talk about taking care of ourselves as leaders and not letting this burden kind of weigh on us. If you find that this is eating away at you, if you find yourself thinking about these situations that are happening with your people when you're not at work a lot, that means that this is getting to you too. And you might think, oh, I can handle this. I can deal with this. Over time, even if you have a lot of grit as a leader, this still is the kind of thing that will eat away over time and make you enjoy your job less, which in and of itself is a problem. You need to enjoy coming to work. You need to be able to put your all into your work and your people to be able to bring the results for yourself and for them and open doors for them. And there's no way you can do that. There's no way you can continue to have that passion around that if you're experiencing these issues yourself. And so when all the talking you're doing about resources, look into them for yourself and see if any of them will help you get through these things too.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.